Welcome back to another lecture video for the course Introduction to Communication and Media. Last time, we tackled how the big media companies select their news and also some of the models that they follow in order to filter or decide on which news items to allow for publication or broadcast. Today, we will be having another lesson, this time zooming into the constituents of media production to examine the pressures and constraints that media practitioners experience as they become part of large media organizations. Many prospective students of media express an ambition to become journalists, or at least part of a prominent media organization. They think that the profession seems relevant to their personal vision. Well, attractions are obvious. You are out and about rather than stuck at a desk. You don't know what reporting job you will be on from day to day. There is a possibility of travel, of meeting interesting people, and you will be of service to the community. How about you? Why did you decide to study communication and media? Young people with a keen eye on a profession in the media have already had experiences on the school paper or the college radio station. They are driven not only by interest and enthusiasm, but by idealism. They see gathering and presentation as important features of country's mental and physical health. They recognize that journalism is eyes, ears, and voice of the public in democracy. Well, perhaps it would be if it could be. As we all know, that rarely happens in real life practice. Free and free press is a relative term. To be free from pressures is not written into any code of practice. As a young and idealist media practitioner, you will encounter pressures and constraints soon enough. So with that, it is best to be familiar with Malitsky's model of mass communication process. A useful model in highlighting the features of practitioners, production, and consumers of mass communication is that of German Malitsky's that he published in 1963. It is kind of a very elaborate model, so we will cut it into two and start first with its communicator arm. As you can see here at the left side, there are 6 major factors that exert influence on the communicator, or what we call the media practitioner, and therefore affect the way he or she selects and structures messages for audience consumption. Let's start first with the first one, which is the communicator's self-image. Imagine that from here on, you are the communicator or the media practitioner. After graduation, you have taken into a regional TV station as a trainee reporter. As a result of the appointment, you see yourself as someone with a high self-esteem. People treated you right and respected you. Maybe you have produced interesting reports in the past that you gained the trust of your editors. You will be moving to a clearer appraisal of your role as a professional, part of which will be the notion that you're doing a good job. Sooner or later, there will come a time when you are asked to do something you consider unprofessional, if not unethical. An example would be intruding upon the grief of a bereaved family in order to get the story. You may feel varying acute degrees of dissonance, of unease. You ask yourself, conscious of the image you hold to yourself, is this the sort of thing that I should be doing? To refuse a particular task is to put your job at risk. Either way, you will attempt to shift your feelings from dissonance to consonance. If you are to stay in the job, this dilemma will recur. Will you attempt to re-educate yourself, or should you try some other profession? The next factor is the communicator's own personality. Some psychiatrists hold that the script of an individual's personality is written in the early years of childhood. Socialization and experience shape your attitudes and values, and these will continue to affect your behavior throughout your life. If, for you, kindness and compassion are values that dominate your decisions, it will be reflected on work that you produce as a journalist. Equally, you may be a person of commitment who wishes to act or get involved rather than to do what a reporter must do, which is just to observe and record. You strive after professional values of objectivity, balance, and impartiality, even though we may not believe any of them to be really possible. As the Australian journalist John Pilger had said, neutrality is a non existent nirvana. Attempting something you do not believe in will prove an intolerable strain unless the inner voice of self, or your conscience, can be squared by argument or rationalization. The third is the communicator's working team. Whatever norms that have been engendered by people working together will be the ones that are most difficult to ignore. The dynamics of groups tend to command or demand a measure of conformity to group rules and practices. The reward of this conformity is the satisfaction and pride of belonging. When individual initiative and group norms come into conflict and have to be resolved, it usually goes into the group's favor, or else the group's performance will be impeded. So, what the members of the team do, you do. The next factor is his organization. The independence of a media personnel in his working group survives only as long as the organization to which it belongs tolerates it. Your news reports shall fulfill the greater aims and objectives of the organization. You would be unlikely to succeed in your job if you submitted stories that ran counter to the ideology of your employers. In a media organization, there will be normative ways of doing things, such as procedures and regulations, and the communication between levels of the hierarchy, or what we call bureaucracy, will be tightly controlled. The second to the last factor is the communicator's social environment. A person's education, upbringing, social class, and social expectations will all affect the communicative behavior within a person's work environment. If the society he or she lives in is patriarchal, he or she may favor men over women in journalism or broadcasting. If the society is authoritarian, it may be harshly repressive of free expression. It may even pose a threat to the lives of media practitioners. The last factor is the pressures and constraints caused by the public character of the media. Let's go back to our previous example. From a local reporting job, you move to public broadcasting. Since it is a state-linked media, you discover that it is too inhibiting because you are always answerable to the government and the media is always under public scrutiny. What do you do now? You transfer to a private media sector. Yet once more, there are regulatory bodies ever prepared to exert influence over content and style. Some of the regulatory bodies in the Philippines include MTRCB, KBP, and NTC. Media companies shall conform to the rules imposed by these regulatory bodies to keep their company operating. Let us now look at the Maletsky model in full. Maletsky is a model of a complex process, but essentially it suggests meaningful interactivity between the communicator and the receiver. This model makes room for spontaneous feedback from the receiver, which happens now because of social media, where netizens can now like, comment, and constantly engage with media material. Let's now discuss the receiver's image of the communicator, or the audience's view of the media outlet. Appropriateness to the expectations of audience is crucial for the success of the newspaper, a radio show, or a television program. What is expected of a media institution like ABS-CBN, to quote their motto, in the service of the Filipino? But years ago, their reputation and credibility was tainted when several issues were filed against them, some of which saying that they are bayaran, biased, and prostitutes. Until now, they are being called a biased CBN. The next factors are the pressures and constraints of message and medium. Journalists are generally perceived to be the first gatekeepers. The journalist is at the front line of mediation, deciding what information to include and what to leave aside, what points to emphasize and which to minimize. First, there is a pressure to find the appropriate angle, a key notion to hang the story on. Second, the pressure of the story having a news value. No reporter wishes to cover a story of little significance. There is a particular satisfaction when a journalist hits the front page, or in broadcasts, the breaking news. However, the determination to write a highly newsworthy story may conflict with institutional constraints. If you are working as a reporter on a local newspaper, you may stumble upon a case of a local government corruption, but your editor might tell you, this isn't the sort of paper that prints that sort of story. The people behind the corruption might be your biggest advertiser, and thus, a conflict of interest arises. The next factors include the receiver's self-image and personality. Self-image is essentially about individuality and tailoring messages to address the individual in the mass is a primary challenge to the communicator. All your life, you have been receivers of media. Your self-image have been affected by your exposure to these. What you read, watch, or listen to is who you are. So if you're the kind of media consumer that wants only showbiz news, media companies will give that to you. By the process of segmentation, communicators tend to know their audience doubts and anxieties, dreams and aspirations, and even their tastes and preferred styles. Media companies know that showbiz stars aren't worth the time of audiences, but they are convinced that the mass is demanding these stories, so they keep on giving it to them. They defend their choices by insisting that they are only giving the people what they want. The last factor is the receiver's social environment. The power of the media communicators to reveal to a community the nature of its own social environment is strictly censored if not forbidden altogether. All that is permitted are visualizations that conform to the requirements of those in total authority. Though many governments, like what we have now, rule or seek to rule through disinformation and insist that the media purvey that disinformation, that does not mean that publics are necessarily misinformed. Last Friday, a campaign was launched by some of the concerned media citizens, urging the public to report the Mocha Usun blog as a perpetrator of hate speech every 8 p.m. until Facebook takes the account down. And that is our discussion of Maletsky's model of mass communication process, together with the pressures and constraints of media practice. Keep safe and see you all soon.